Hey everyone, thanks for joining me today. So today I have a new colleague turned friend. I have Christie Howley-Anderson with me today. Hey Christie, thanks for being with me.
Hi, Navard. How are you?
I'm good. How are you today?
I'm good.
You ready? Okay, so let me tell everyone a little bit about you, and then I'm going to turn it over to you because I want you to give us a proper intro to what you do. So you are a licensed therapist in Jersey, and you're also a relationship coach. So we've met through our coaching program that we both took to become coaches, and then we just connected outside and we're chatting, and then we just decided to record together. So you work specifically with women who are, and I try to do this justice, and it may not be great, but you work with women who have come out of a narcissistic relationship, who are recovering from that, and also learning how to kind of look for healthier relationships. What are the things that they need to do differently next time? So I'm gonna pass it to you for you to give us a better description, and then we'll jump into our topic.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks for the intro. So I am a therapist, and I specifically work with trauma. And in my private practice, I work with men and women, because obviously trauma is not something that just affects one gender. And I really decided to focus on women for coaching because I really had more women that were reaching out for therapy services, but I also realized that so many women were coming forward and saying that they were struggling with feeling like they didn't have a voice and feeling like they were people pleasing. And it's funny that, we were talking earlier about who our population is, because I've also had a lot of men reach out and say, hey, listen, you're talking about narcissism, and we've experienced this too, which of course is true. And so within my coaching program, I focus on recovering from narcissistic love. And I'm putting that in air quotes because narcissistic love is not genuine, empathetic, compassionate love like we empaths can give and receive, but we try really hard to fix the other person. And so if we put that in the context of relationships and marriage, we might not necessarily be married to a narcissist, but we can definitely have partners that display some of the narcissistic tendencies, or we grew up in a household with a narcissist, and so some of that behavior becomes normalized for us and what we expect in relationships, and that really plays into how we show up every day for our partner.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love broadening it because a lot of people that listen to this, it's men and women. And I think it's so true that I think the word narcissism has become a really casual word that's thrown around, but the it's overused, unfortunately, but and the reason I say unfortunately is because the actual definition of a narcissist is pretty intense. Like
Mhm.
it's not good at all. And it's talking about someone who's selfish or controlling. Those are factors or features of a narcissist, but that is not all that it entails. And so you and I aren't necessarily going to be focused on narcissistic relationships because, again, those are they're not as run of the mill, I guess. But let's define it first, because I think let's create a separation of what a narcissist is, whether it's a man or a woman. And then let's take some of the main features that we do see in more kind of maybe more common relationships. We've talked about, you and I were talking about specific characteristics. So I'm talking in circles. So define narcissism for us, or what a narcissistic person looks like.
So without giving like the whole, clinical diagnostic code definition, because you're right, there is a distinction. Someone who has narcissistic personality disorder is not who we're looking at, right? And I agree that it's somewhat overused, but I also think that there are people who display traits of narcissism.
Yeah.
And I think the really ironic thing is when people say, oh, only 1% of people actually have narcissism. The key of narcissism or narcissistic personality disorder is that someone feels so overly confident in who they are, and they don't take responsibility, and they can't be wrong, that they're not going to go to therapy and sit there and say, this is what I'm feeling like is wrong with me, and help me and walk me through this because I want to better myself. So whether we're talking about somebody that actually has NPD or somebody who just is displaying certain characteristics, it really is emotionally abusive and toxic behaviors. Now, can people recover from that if they're aware and they're doing the active work? Yeah, there's definitely, for lack of a better word, hope for that. But a lot of people are so stuck in these personality traits, and it really affects all of their interpersonal relationships. So it's someone who they have this grandiose, inflated sense of self, and they're usually very emotionally toxic to other people in their life. Now, to other people, they can often be seen as really charismatic and really engaging and really likable, and they have this really engaging side to them. But then to their partners, there's this aspect of power and control, and they want to maintain that power and control. So a lot of times there's these mind games. And so for narcissists, the biggest tool is the mind games and the gaslighting and the name calling, right? There's not always physical abuse. It's a different kind of abuse. Mm-hmm. And so most people who've experienced narcissistic love, they walk away feeling like, I don't even trust myself or know who I am, or I've totally lost my sense of identity, because it's all mental and emotional manipulation.
Yeah. It's so interesting, because I think a lot of the women that I work with in therapy who have, or men, but I don't really know the statistics on it, but it seems like a lot more women are coming forward and talking about their abusive experience or emotionally abusive experience. But it's this theme that I've noticed where there's very much that identity crisis of, I never would have stood up for that, would have taken that. Like, I can't believe I went into this relationship so confident, so strong in who I was. I worked, I did this, I did this. And then somehow through this relationship, I had completely lost who I was. And then now coming out of it, or trying to come out of the relationship, they cannot find that voice. Like you said, like and when we say find your voice, right, it's, they don't know how to identify what they want, let alone try to seek it, because they're so scared that they are not capable anymore. And this person they were in a relationship with has slowly chipped away at that person, the core of who they were, that confident person, even if they weren't overly confident, like they just maybe had a sense of self that was comfortable. Yeah. And over time, they just lost track of that, to where they became very uncertain, very just, they couldn't see that they were capable of the smallest thing, like maybe finding a new job because they're not happy in the one they're in, or moving on to a different relationship that maybe no one else will want them because they're quote unquote broken or whatever. Right. So how do you see in both men and women that you've worked with, is that a common trait that it does chip away?
I think you just defined how the clients that I work with, how they come to me and the space that they're in so eloquently, is they say, I don't even know what I like anymore. I don't even know the kind of food I like. I couldn't even tell you what my favorite color is. And that's not who I was. And most of that is because the person they're with prioritizes themselves so much and makes their partner prioritize them. And through things like name calling or mind games, right? Like someone could have proof. Let's say someone's cheating and they have proof. Maybe it's a CC camera, maybe it's text messages or video footage, and they're showing their partner and they're like, I have proof that you, and rather than admitting it or having a conversation about it, their partner's like, wait a minute, so now you're looking at my phone? So now, wait a minute, you don't trust me? And they're like, well, wait a minute, I have reason not to trust you because look what I found. And it's like, wait a minute, but you went looking through my stuff. You're the one that's wrong here. And so it's games like that where they start to feel like, okay, maybe I'm the problem. Maybe it is me. Maybe there's something wrong with me. And they take that, and that just extends into every aspect of who they are. And it whittles away their self-worth, their self-esteem, their confidence.
Yeah. And, we said we weren't going to dive into this, but it's so hard not to, because I think it's really, really, it's fascinating, right? Like, looking at, because I think every one of us knows someone who has been in a gaslighting situation or a manipulative situation. So as I say, we're not diving into the actual diagnosis, then I also catch myself, I'm like, well, but we're talking about traits, and those traits do exist in a lot of people. So if we're coming back to just the traits, we're not going for the clinical, we're not talking about that person that fits all those clinical, criteria, but let's talk about more day-to-day aspects of this, because I think you can have someone who manipulates and lies and shames and makes you question yourself, but doesn't maybe meet full diagnosis criteria for diagnosis. How do we distinguish that? Because I think some people listening to this might be in a relationship where they're like, yeah, my spouse is a narcissist, but they might not fully be. That fear of what if might exist. So how do we, I don't know, how do we distinguish? And then let's get to the hope part, right? What do we
Yeah.
do about it?
Well, so I would look at it this way. All people who are emotionally abusive are not narcissists. All narcissists are emotionally abusive, right? So they're not all the same. But people who are emotionally abusive or who exhibit emotional abuse doesn't necessarily mean that they're a narcissist. It means that they typically have really low self-esteem themselves. Think of like a schoolyard bully, right? They put other people down and they make fun of other people because they want to make themselves feel big. And so in relationships where you have a partner who is putting down their partner, constantly making them feel bad about themselves, a lot of people will say, oh, it's because they're drinking or because there's other factors involved. But I would argue this, if that same person was at work, would they treat their boss the same way, or would there be consequences? So they've created a space within their relationship where it's tolerated. And that's not to say that the person, their partner, or their spouse accepts this and wants this. It means that it's been created this way. And so they're living in this condition of fear. And so it's been conditioned that this is how things are. And a lot of times they don't even recognize it for what it is because it happens so slowly. Think of like the frog in the boiling pot of water, right? You turn up the heat so slowly that you don't even realize that it's happening. And so a lot of times that's what we're looking at. It could be really great in the beginning of the relationship. I always say if you go on a first date with someone and they punch you in the nose, you're not going to go on a second date. But it doesn't happen on the first date. It might happen on the 6-month mark where things start to they maybe call you a name and you're like, well, that really hurt. And then they apologize and it's a cycle. And usually somewhere in that cycle is this honeymoon phase where things are better, and it could be a day or 6 months. And so you kind of have this internal struggle of, well, it's not always bad. And I don't know, like, yeah, sometimes it's bad, but it's not always bad. And those are the things that we kind of grab onto when we say, well, I'm not going to leave, right? And we look at all the reasons that we want to stay because we have kids, because we're financially dependent or intertwined. And so we can easily talk ourselves in or out of things.
Your 6-month mark example is so great because I think that so many people think back to the early stages of the relationship, and they're like, but that's not who that he or she was when we first started dating. Like, I want to go back to how things were then, and that's who they really are. And I have to burst that bubble sometimes and say, look, the reality is that that's not most likely who they are now is who they really are. That first 6 months or however long that honeymoon phase is, that where you have, an increased dopamine rush and you're doing what you can to get this person. And then over time, you don't work as hard, your brain settles down, and then you just settle into who you really are. And I think people get so attached, and it's just human nature, like emotionally, you get attached to those good memories and that really fun foundation. But that was a fake foundation. And it sucks when that happens. Sometimes you can look back and be like, oh, well, yeah, I did notice this, but it was just that one time. So there's so many reasons that people overlook these things or don't notice them, or they don't even present themselves until here they are. But then when you're in a relationship with someone that maybe doesn't do it heavily, maybe every now and then they exhibit control or some kind of behavior that is very hurtful or kind of top down. Do you find that it takes a while for people to notice that that's what they're in?
Usually years. And I think there's an interesting dynamic with how that person presents to other people. So I see both. I see where other people are completely oblivious, like their friends, their family, they think this person walks on water. And so if that person were to kind of check in with their support system, they'd be like, oh my gosh, they're amazing. What are you talking about? They're fantastic. They're so helpful. Or other people recognize the red flags before the person in the relationship, and they're checking in with that person like, hey, I was not okay with how they spoke to you, or is that how they talk to you all the time? And then you justify. It's like, no, it's okay. They were just having a really bad day. And so either one of those two dynamics, either way, it's really isolating for the person in that relationship. Either they feel like they're getting pressure to see this person for this amazing person that other people think they are, or they're like, you need to leave. you need to leave. This person's bad. And they're like, I can't just leave. What are you talking about? You don't see all the good things.
Mm-hmm.
So usually it takes a really long time for them to even recognize that it is as bad as it is, because most relationships aren't all bad all the time.
Yeah.
And so when it's not all bad all the time, you really cling to the gifts or the trips, right? Because we don't want to, we invest so much in our partners.
Yep.
And we want to think, especially if recovering people pleaser here, you want to make people happy, and you want to fix your partner. If there's something wrong, especially in my marriage, I want to fix it. I will love you through this. Let's go to therapy. Let's talk about it. And so I think it takes people a really long time to get to that point where they're like, okay, this might not be fixable, but they'll go through a whole lot to get there. And oftentimes it is fixable. It's just both people have to be on the same page.
Right. And you throw in children to the equation. People are afraid to rip up families, or there could have been a like, well, if you leave, you're selfish, you're doing this to our kids kind of thing. And that's part of that abuse. Right. But so when we think, because I'm mindful that some people listening to this might be like, what are you trying to tell me? Like, I'm supposed to be scared in my marriage? Yeah. I mean, if you have reason to be concerned about your spouse and their behavior, I want this to be a like, just a, I don't know. I think sometimes we have to listen to hard things to have some introspection. Are you in a relationship with someone that could use some self-awareness, and that maybe you hearing that these traits aren't great. They may not be narcissists, but maybe they are exhibiting traits that aren't healthy. And so it's just good to be aware. Maybe you're listening to this and you do exhibit some controlling traits, or you do have super, extreme mood swings that can come across as scary or controlling or manipulative or gaslighty. So this is just like, we can't be scared to always look at ourselves, and are we doing things that we shouldn't be doing? Are we in a relationship that we're happy with? Do we want it? Are there ways that we need to explore change? And so then when we talk about those specific traits, what are some things that we would want? I guess the step one is being able to find your voice, right? So when you talk about women and men in a lot of situations, finding their voice, let's define that a little bit. Like, why is that a struggle for some people?
Well, I think whether you come from, and I will say most people that find themselves in situations where they're in unhealthy relationships, they haven't come from amazingly, amazing, structured, foundational families of origin. So whether there were a parent that wasn't present, or they grew up in a similar household, or they had some trauma along the way, maybe they recognize it, maybe they don't, they might have low self-esteem. And so they're getting into a relationship where they feel like they don't exactly know how to stand up for themselves to begin with. And so for someone who picks up on that, and they do have a dynamic of control or power, they pick up on that. And so it just becomes this cycle where they feel like I almost am attracted to people who treat me poorly because that's been normalized for me. I don't necessarily like it, but I also don't, it's kind of like the devil, like I don't know what it's like to feel good in a relationship. And maybe I self-sabotage. If somebody is a really great potential partner, I almost look at them and say, nope, I'll screw that up. So that's not for me. And so people find themselves in this partnership where they're not happy, but it's what's comfortable, normal. Again, not saying that they want this, but sometimes it's what you've been brought up with, or what you've been exposed to, and it's just what you know how to live in.
Yeah. And so, when I think of kind of the basics of finding your voice, of really evaluating if you're in a good relationship, or if there are things that need to be worked on. Because you and I mean, just coming from the therapeutic perspective, we've both had to walk, someone might come to counseling, and towards as the process goes, divorce has had to be the option that's pursued, right? We've both had to guide people to where either that's the option they want to take and we have to help them navigate it, or together it's discovered that that is the healthiest approach. And it sucks. We don't teach about healthy marriages because we want people to get divorced. Like we do what we have to do to help people be okay within themselves and their families or whatever. But all that to say, if when you're talking to someone who is unsure of the status of their relationship. One of the foundations, I think, for us in working with people is, well, lay out the things that you like and lay out the things that you don't like. Like, what are the aspects of your relationship with your partner that are really strong? And what are the aspects that aren't great? What are the qualities in yourself that you're proud of that you bring to this relationship? And what's the ugly that comes out of you sometimes? And same for your spouse. What are the things that they do that you were like, this is so great, they're so loving and caring? And then what are the qualities that aren't fantastic? And I think if you can lay out that, all of it, lay it out on the table, then it's easier to really consider, what of this needs to change? It doesn't have to be abusive to need to change. It just has to be, either maybe something you're not happy with, something that leads to conflict. And some of that might be you, and you need to work on it. And some of it might be them, and they need to work on it. So when we lay all these things out, what are some of the main things that you would say would be like really controlling traits that we would say, please, please, either within yourself, if you exhibit this, or if you're in a relationship with someone, this needs to be addressed? What are some of those main traits?
Yeah. I think physical abuse is the automatic. When anybody says
Yes.
abusive, people go right to that, right? And so I think that goes without saying, but it doesn't have to be physical to be abusive. And so I think financial abuse is a really significant one that most people don't recognize, especially when you're in a marriage, because everyone manages finances differently. But some people just say, hey, listen, one partner's the breadwinner, the other one stays home. Both people should have access to money. So I think if there's a restriction in any way where someone isn't able to access, or they get an allowance, or you have to ask or get permission, or there's, withholding, that's a red flag, right? Both partners should be equally able to access and be able to provide for, if there's children, dependents, without having to ask or do something to get the finances. Verbal abuse is really tricky, because I think most of us can say, you know what, sometimes when I get mad, I'm not my best self. And I've said things. What does the reparation process look like? Do you repair? I know I've yelled at my kids more times than I'd like to count, but I always repair. And I always take a look at myself and say, okay, what can I do better? And so I think if that piece is there, that's a good sign. But when you have a cycle where there's someone always feeling like they're walking on eggshells, and they're always feeling like something is going to happen, I don't know when, I don't know what it's going to be, but I know there's going to be this explosion. And then there is, right? Whether it's physical, or a screaming match, or breaking something. It doesn't have to be hurting someone, right? Or driving really recklessly to scare them, right? Something that instills fear, but you should never be afraid in your relationship. And I think that's a big cornerstone is, are you ever afraid of your partner, or afraid of what they're going to do? Whether they're going to, slander you, or get you fired from your job, or tell the kids something terrible about you, or hurt a pet. Those are, you shouldn't be withholding anything, and you shouldn't be afraid. And I think if those things are present, to take a hard look at, okay, there might be some really great things, but if I'm constantly living in fear that something else is going to happen, maybe there needs to be a conversation with myself or a support system.
Those two, it's almost, there's so many details that you and I could get into about, like, they do this, people do this, it's not good. But you broke it down in categories, almost like just looking at it from the perspective of, do you feel fear? That is such a huge, huge, huge question to ask yourself, because that is something that can really cover a lot of different things. Like, are you scared to ask for something? Are you scared to talk openly? Are you scared to tell them something that happened? Are you scared that the kids might misbehave in front of them? Like, so many things can be measured by, what is that core feeling that you have? Now, of course, fear could come from the other person, and the behaviors that they, or the way they treat you, or you could have your own, like you said, maybe stuff that you've brought on from past relationships or childhood that you need to look at. So again, we're not going to say, well, oh my gosh, I feel fear of my spouse, immediately that means they're abusive. Right. No, let's look at that. Let's explore, where is this coming from? When did it start? How has it developed? And so just like with anything, we need to do the work to really get clarity and self-awareness. And then once you work through that on yourself and your spouse, then it's easier. But then the other thing you said was, so we said fear, and what was the other one?
Withholding, like if you don't have access, or people are that control dynamic.
Yeah, where you can't live the life, like you were a subordinate,
Yeah.
right? Anytime you're a subordinate to your spouse, unless there has been some specific agreement of like, listen, I'm awful with numbers, numbers scare me, don't tell me. Okay, fine.
Right.
But when you want access and you're not allowed it, or you want to take the kids to the doctor, but your spouse says no because it costs too much money, is there a conversation there, or is it a decision that that person has made and you can't get care and whatever clothes? There are a lot of people that are like, I'm not allowed to buy stuff for myself, but they can buy for themselves. So feeling like a subordinate or feeling fear, we want to just explore, is that coming from a place that needs work? The other thing that popped in my mind while you were talking was the importance, because you were talking about repairing. And I love that because we all mess up. Oh my gosh, like you were saying as parents, I mean, constantly having to be like, whoops, like, so sorry, I was not mommy's best moment. And here's what I should have done instead, right? We model that. But one of the most impactful things that I've heard a lot of people in an unhealthy relationship says is that their spouse never apologizes.
Yeah.
And some of these, it's their parent, right? So not having someone, if you're in a relationship with someone who can never take ownership for what they've done wrong, and it's always your fault. You shouldn't have pushed me. Well, you made me mad. Okay, and you may have played a role, but we're all responsible for ourselves. And I think that that is one of the biggest things that I struggle with personally, because I'm a recovering people pleaser as well. I will own up my mistake to my mistake all the time.
Yeah.
And I need that validation back when the other person messes up. I need to know that we have both recognized our part and now we're going to heal and repair this together to move forward. But if I am left with this gaping wound, if you've done something or something has happened between us, I have owned my part and you will not heal that with me. Now, not only do I feel awful about myself, I don't trust you, I'm scared of you, and I don't know how to ever be comfortable that I'm not going to, quote, get in trouble again, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know where I was going with that.
No, but it's valid. I think, regardless of whether or not people have kids, even modeling for your partner. Because if we're recognizing that our partner is doing something that we don't like, yes, it's important to have the conversation, but it doesn't mean anything if we're also not modeling it, right? So I can look at my partner and say, I really need you to, I don't know, I really need you to start apologizing. But if I don't do it, then it doesn't mean anything because I'm just, it's unfair. So I think even, our conversation earlier of, we also have to have, there has to be equality. And that can look like so many things that we don't have time for, but you have to be able to be equals and partners. And one person can't, now look, there's going to be different things that happen in a marriage and different thing that happens in a relationship. And somebody's needs or priorities might take precedence at a particular time. I need to go back to school. You need to get this program, but decisions should be met equally. Decisions about parenting, decisions about your relationship, your living status, you should always feel like you have an equal partnership. And if you don't, then that's a conversation to look at and say, okay, so am I feeling fear, or is it just we're just not communicating?
Right. And, things change. You might start out in your relationship or be in a phase of your relationship where you agree that someone's going to have one role, the other, like maybe someone works and the other stays at home. But when or if one person stops feeling great about this arrangement, you should be allowed to say, hey, I think we need to reevaluate because I thought I would be okay with this and I find myself really feeling upset or resentful or hurt or whatever. But that's just part of growing, right? Like who you are before you have kids in your marriage is different from who you are after you have kids in your marriage. It changes. They change you. You have to adapt. So how can we expect our marriage, whether you have kids or not, to stay completely static? Like it's changing all the time. What we experience in life changes, our jobs change us. If you lose a parent or a friend or your whatever, like mood, hormones, all of it
Yeah.
changes you. And if you're not growing on like at a pace with your spouse where you're growing together, even if it's not experienced by the other person, but it is shared with that other person, then we're missing a beat. And I think if that other person tells you or tries to make you feel bad because you're experiencing a change and they don't want to hop on board or like maybe join you to figure it out, then that's a problem. Like, we want to look at that. We want to stop. And I'm a big fan of, if I need it, I need you to at least acknowledge it. Like, you may not agree, you may not like what I have to say, but you have to give me the respect of letting me share it with you, as long as I'm being respectful in how I communicate. But I think so many people in these controlling relationships, the quote unquote victim, feels like they have to maintain the peace and
Yes.
being open. Back to your finding their voice. They suppress their voice, even if they don't, like, they may have it, they may know it's in there and they haven't lost it, but they suppress it. And then eventually you suppress it enough, it stops existing.
Yeah. Yeah. And the finding your voice piece is just, to me, that is the pinnacle of healing. Because when I see women and they come to me and they're saying, I don't know who I am, I don't know what I like, I don't know who I am anymore. It's okay. The goal, everyone should have their own goals, but for me, the goal should be to get you to a place where sometimes women can't look in the mirror because they're like, I don't even know who that is anymore. So getting them to a point where they feel a sense of confidence, they feel like no is a full sentence. I can say no to something just because. Yesterday I went to Trader Joe's with my 9-year-old and my daughter, and she asked for stickers. They give out stickers. And normally she says, Mom, can you ask them for stickers? And she did it herself. And she said, oh, do you have any stickers? And the woman pulled out ones that had flowers on it. And she said, oh, these are all I have. Is this okay? And my daughter, normally very people pleasing, just said, oh, actually, no, thank you. I don't really like those.
I love it.
Oh my gosh, I'm so proud of you. Let me go find ones for you. And then praised her and said, I'm a former teacher, and I'm so glad when I hear kids respectfully saying, no, thank you, that's not what I want, right? Because we need to build that when they're young. And as long as we're being respectful, we have to be able to say what we want. Because if we're not met with someone understanding that, and someone just says, well, nobody cares what you want, that's what we expect from a partner.
Yep. 100%. And, I'm mindful of our time because you and I, when we hopped on this and started talking, we just chit chatted for so long that we didn't leave ourselves enough time to record. So I have to actually wrap us up because I've got another client. But one of the things that I'll say, and then we'll close it out, is a lot of the times people make excuses to not go through the proper, to push for change and growth because they don't want to disrupt. Well, I don't want to do, I don't want my kids to know, or I don't want to separate or divorce because of my kids. And I'm like, okay, but here's what you have to remember. You becoming miserable and having a very unhappy relationship with your spouse, it is like, it's noticeable to everyone. Your kids now, okay, fine, you stay together, it's great. But now they're growing up in a really weird house with a lot of tension and parents that don't really like each other. Do you not think that that's going to impact your kids moving on? Like, there's no great scenario here that does not include growth and change and challenging the problem, because we have to show our kids that we can face issues and do the hard work to get better, or else we're just teaching our kids to live in unhappiness or to be scared to not rock the boat or all of that. So gosh, we have so much more to talk about. So let's do this. Let's wrap up because otherwise we'll keep going. But we'll probably have to just almost do like a part 2 and pick up another time. But before we go, tell us about if people want to find you, because what you do and what I want people to hear is you don't have to be in a relationship with someone that fits the criteria for narcissism to learn about about finding your voice and just being in a healthy relationship. And so I want anyone listening to this to know about what you do and your group, because you have a free Facebook group too. So tell us where people can find you.
So I think the easiest way to find me is my website is coachingwithchristie.com. And so you can learn a little bit more about me and my story and how to connect with me. But I do have a free Facebook group. And so the link to that is right on my webpage.
And I'll link to everything too.
Yeah, that's perfect. My program is called Reclaiming You. And if you just want to find me on Instagram, I am at the Self-Growth Coach. And I post a lot of information on rebuilding yourself and your self-worth and narcissism. And so, yeah, I mean, you don't have to identify as being in a relationship with a narcissist just to learn a little bit more and better your quality of life.
Yeah, you teach a lot about boundaries and things like that too. And I think that's for anyone. Like, you don't have to be in an unhealthy or dysfunctional relationship with your spouse to learn about implementing boundaries with other people in your life as well. So that's what I love about it. So Christie, thank you so much. I'm sorry to rush us off, but I'm excited to do another episode with you. Thank you for being with me.
No, thank you so much. This was a lot of fun, and I can't wait for part 2.
All right, girl, I'll talk to you later.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.